Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can't get over this because the Prime Minister is standing in question period today while millions of Ontarians are under lockdown again. The third wave is raging, and he's speculating about his own international travel. I guess international travel, it's not the time for that unless it's FOMO for the Prime Minister missing out on a cocktail party or some sort of photo op. The reality is that by the end of February, only 5% of Canadians had received even their first shot. That's unconscionable. Will the Prime Minister admit that if he had...
Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reality is Canadians have now been 25% of Canadians have received at least their first shot of the vaccines. And in the coming weeks, we're going to start getting more than 2 million vaccines every single week. And those numbers are going to keep going up. We know how important this is. On the issue of international travel, it is amazing to see the lengths to which the Conservative Party will go to make attacks. I highlighted that I was hoping to attend the G7 heads of government meeting in June in Cornwall to work on the global recovery, but the Conservatives certainly can't have any of that.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
You know what? There's a lot of Canadians who want to travel to go to funerals, to visit ailing loved ones. But they're not having any of that. And that's because the Prime Minister only delivered enough for 5% of Canadians to get their first dose of vaccine within the first 2 months of the year, that critical time when we could have stopped the first wave. He spent last summer covering up the WE scandal and shutting down Parliament instead of negotiating contracts that could have gotten us those vaccines. Will he admit that his failure to procure vaccines in January and February led to the third wave?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, again, we have now passed the threshold of having vaccinated 25% of Canadians, and we need to continue to do more, and that is something we're going to continue to do. In terms of the opportunities for the global community to come together, and particularly the leaders of the 7 largest economies, as I said, it is not certain, but I am hopeful to be able to sit with them in person, and I would do it wherever it was, whether it was in Cornwall, whether it was held in Oklahoma. I would be there to be there for the G7.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
The Prime Minister can mock his international travel against people who need to travel to see ailing loved ones who are separated with their families, but that's not going to cut it. He cites statistics, but one statistic is fact. Only 2% of Canadians, 2% have been fully vaccinated. That's abysmal. That's not going to stop the third wave. There's not enough supply. We're having to administer first shots of vaccines off-label for 4 months because he didn't produce enough vaccines. We could have stopped the first wave if he had gotten us vaccines in January and February, but he didn't. Why?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the Conservatives demonstrate that they'll never let the facts get in the way of a good political partisan attack. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, is we have been working diligently, and indeed experts and the National Advisory Council on Immunization made a recommendation that Canada follow a one-dose strategy with a larger stretch point between the 2 doses so that we could ensure more Canadians are protected. Those decisions are grounded in science, and even the Conservative health critic has to recognize that rather than make partisan attacks.
Honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
It's just ridiculous. It's off-label. No other country is separating doses by 4 months. Only Canada, because he didn't get us enough vaccines. Fact, only 2% of Canadians are fully vaccinated. Fact, only 5% were fully vaccinated by the end of January. That's his partisan fault. Enough with the partisan games. He didn't get us these vaccines. Now we're in the third wave. Now ICUs are overflowing, and it's because he didn't negotiate these contracts. Why didn't we have enough vaccines in January and February? For shame.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, again, I don't want to tell the health critic for the Conservative Party how to do her job, but if she actually looked around, the UK was actually the first country to expand that 4-month spread strategy, and as a way of getting more people protected as quickly as possible. So that is the strategy that Canadian scientists and experts have recommended, and that is what we are continuing to do. We have now passed the threshold of 25% of Canadians vaccinated. We have millions more vaccines coming in the coming months, coming weeks and months, and we look forward to getting through this pandemic by working together.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Sadly, Mr. Speaker, people are still faced with the impossible choice of going into work sick or staying at home and not getting pay because his Prime Minister refuses to fix the paid sick leave. The Ontario Science Table agrees. Paid sick leave saves lives. Yet the Prime Minister continues to refuse to improve access to the paid sick leave. He's not listening to the scientists. He's not listening to workers. He's not listening to families who have lost loved ones. What will it take for the Prime Minister to improve access to paid sick leave and save workers?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from the beginning of this pandemic, we have had Canadians' backs with...
All right, Canadians. This one from Pierre Poilievre is just heated. That last one was outstanding from Michelle Rempel Garner. This is it. And then we have Barrett coming up. Double barrels. He's firing. Check this out.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Sorry about that. Yeah, no worries. In the UK, restaurants are starting to reopen. In New Zealand, in Australia, they're accepting international travelers without a quarantine. In the U.S., large gatherings for sports and music events are starting to resume safely. But here in Canada, there's a major third wave. How come Canada is in such a negative position with respect to our other international allies? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that there are many Canadians who are going through very tough times right now during this third vague, but we also recognize that there are places in Canada that aren't facing a third wave, whether it's the Atlantic provinces or the work the federal government did with them that allowed them to have a different reality during this pandemic, or also in the north. We worked with the ministers of the territories so that this pandemic would be different for them. There are other areas that need more help, but the government will be there for Ontario and for other places that do need our assistance. The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Vaccines. Yeah. That was the one job he had at this point in the crisis. Now he tries to throw on a cape and says he's the hero that's going to solve the problem that he caused. Yeah. The reality is the rest of the world was being vaccinated in January and February. Vaccination rates in the U.S. and U.K. are twice what they are here in Canada. The rest of the world is reopening while we're being confined to our basements because of the wave of the variants that this Prime Minister allowed. Why did the rest of the world have access to vaccines in January and February while we did not?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, it should come as no surprise that that particular member has a way of inventing facts. The reality is we did get vaccines in January and February, unlike what the member is saying. But yes, indeed, we need to continue to increase it. Although for January, February, March, we actually surpassed our target of 6 million vaccines by almost 9.5 million vaccines total. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to deliver vaccines to Canadians as quickly as possible. We are now third in the G20 in terms of number of citizens vaccinated with at least one dose. We will continue to accelerate our vaccination.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
Inventing facts. This from the Prime Minister, who has been embarrassed again on the international stage for stating falsehoods. Let me quote the Independent of London. The Canadian Prime Minister has bizarrely claimed that the UK is facing a very serious third wave of COVID-19, despite cases in Britain currently being much lower than in Canada. So he spreads misinformation here at home and embarrasses us abroad, well, he should be apologizing for his colossal failure to deliver vaccines. Why weren't Canadians vaccinated in January and February like everyone else?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I've answered that question, but it is fascinating to me that the former member, the former finance critic of the Conservative Party, the now critic for jobs and growth, has absolutely nothing to say about our federal budget. We just put forward an ambitious plan for jobs and growth that I'm quite aware that the Conservatives have taken issue with, but they are choosing to not use this opportunity for debate, for discussion in this House of Commons to ask it. And I know the member from Carleton never shies away from debate, but why isn't he asking any questions about our plan to grow the economy? Is it because it's that good?
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Well, it's because I looked through it and there was no plan for jobs or for growth to debate. All he's done is lock down the businesses that provide the jobs and growth. He's locked them down through his failure and his failure alone to deliver the vaccines that are opening up economies around the world. The President of the United States said every single adult in America is now eligible for vaccines. Here in Canada, we haven't even had 30 vaccines per 100 people. That is the contrast. If he wants to know why we have 300,000 missing jobs and so many people seeing the end of their lives as a result of COVID-19, it's because of his failure. Why didn't we get vaccinated in January and February like everyone else?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I now understand why the member for Carleton is not asking questions about the budget. He hasn't actually read the budget. So let me inform him that in this budget, we're extending emergency supports to bridge Canadians and Canadian businesses through to recovery. We're extending employment insurance sickness benefits from 15 to 26 weeks. We're revitalizing Canada's tourism sector with $1 billion investment. We're funding to enhance initiatives like the Black Entrepreneurship Program and the Women Entrepreneurship Strategy. We're establishing a $15 minimum wage, enriching the Canada Workers Benefit, investing in our small businesses and the transformation and supports they're going to need for the future. Mr. Speaker, this is a jobs and growth budget, and we are all apparently very proud of it in this House.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Mr. Speaker, one of the Prime Minister's key commitments in the budget is for universal childcare. He's taking his cue from Quebec, which became a global pioneer in this area when Pauline Marois of the Parti Québécois created our daycare centres in 1997. Since the Prime Minister himself is basing himself on Quebec, would it not be natural for him to not dictate to Quebec what to do with its share of the money it's owed? Students don't correct teachers. So can the Prime Minister confirm that Quebec will receive its fair share of its funding without conditions? Without strings? That's the question. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Quebecers have shown for quite some time the path to follow with respect to daycare centres and for early childhood learning. We know that it's not just the right thing to do, but it's also the intelligent thing to do for the economy, for fairness, and for opportunities and economic growth. That's exactly why we're going to bring forward what we all have learned from Quebec across the country. And I would like to reassure you that Budget 2021 will have an asymmetrical plan with Quebec to allow for other improvements to its system. The Honourable Member for Joliette. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What we want to know is, will this agreement have strings or not? What Quebec wants is no conditions at all. We want a confirmation of this. Will there be conditions or not? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, for several years now, we've been investing tens of millions across the country to increase daycare systems across the country, and every time we were able to get along very well with Quebec to send funds there so that we can invest in families and children. And certainly, Mr. Speaker, the work we're going to do with Quebec together to meet the needs of families across the country, and with the investment we're going to send to Quebec so that Quebec can invest properly. Well, we're very happy to be able to agree with Quebec on this, and we're sure that will happen. Thank you.
All right, Canadians, we have double barrel Barrett on bearing down on Trudeau. Figuratively speaking, of course, we don't want any more yayas. All right, so check this out. It gets pretty heated, and these are the three of the day. 3 stars.
Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
When confronted with facts, this Prime Minister screams out that it's fake news, but he justifies Canada going off label on the vaccines with a 4-month dosing, saying that the Brits did the same, when in fact they used a 3-month dosing interval. So instead of spreading misinformation, can the Prime Minister stand up and admit that Canada is in its 3rd wave of lockdowns because he failed to deliver enough vaccines for Canadians to get both doses in January and February?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, a year ago there was no COVID-19 vaccines. Now there are many. And Canada, because of our procurement strategy, was able to sign deals with 7 different potential vaccine makers, many of which are able now to deliver vaccines, including to Canada. We continue to increase the pace of vaccinations, vaccine doses arriving in Canada. Indeed, in about a week and a half, we will switch to more than 2 million doses of vaccines arriving every single week. We will have close to 50 million vaccine doses by the end of June here in Canada. Mr. Speaker, we are on track to get through this pandemic.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Well, it's a real shame that this Prime Minister says that with only 2.5% of Canadians fully vaccinated that we're on track. This 3rd wave is his failure. Residents in my riding can look across the border and see Americans in New York State who can get vaccinated at 16 years of age at their will because they have availability of supply. This is the 3rd wave of COVID, the 3rd wave of lockdowns because this Prime Minister failed to get enough vaccines for Canadians. Instead of making deals with the Chinese-owned CanSino, why didn't this Prime Minister focus on doing what was best for Canadians and getting vaccines for January and February?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, it's important that in this House we base our debate in facts. And in January and February, we did deliver hundreds of thousands of vaccine doses to Canadians. And indeed, by the end of March, by the end of the 1st quarter, we had surpassed our provisions, our scheduled deliveries of 6 million vaccines by a total of 9.5 million vaccines. We recognize there is much more to do, but as of right now, Mr. Speaker, over 25% of Canadians have received at least 1 dose of the vaccine, and we are on our way to getting through this pandemic.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Well, I guess this Prime Minister hopes that Canadians will accept that he will under-promise and over-deliver up to 2.5% of Canadians being fully vaccinated. I can tell the Prime Minister through you, Speaker, that's not good enough. This Prime Minister shut down Parliament during a pandemic, had his members filibuster the Health Committee, Defence Committee, Ethics Committee, Procedure and House Affairs, instead of working together in a Team Canada approach to vaccinate Canadians. This 3rd wave is a failure of this Prime Minister. 25% of Canadians getting their first dose is not enough to stop the 3rd wave. Why did this Prime Minister let us down?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, throughout this pandemic, one of the things that has been strong and remarkable is the level of collaboration we've seen across political parties and indeed across orders of government. That's what Canadians have wanted to see, people working together, like the federal government has consistently been there to support the provinces and territories as we make it through the various waves and as we face far too many tragedies. That's why 8 out of every $10 of support for the families through this pandemic came from the federal government. We have continued to step up every step of the way, and we will continue to. We know we need to continue to work together. Nobody wants to see the partisan attacks that are being demonstrated now. They want to see us all working together, which we will.
The Honourable.
Don't forget to like, dislike, subscribe, and comment. Safe Space Cafe. And always, have a good day.